What is up, Internet basketball junkies? Coach Hack here. I'm joined by Coach John Ashworth, making his second appearance on Coach Hack Live here. Back by popular demand, Coach. Are you excited to talk about scouting here tonight?
Yes, absolutely. I think scouting is essential, as you know, in preparation. And there are a lot of good notes that I think we can provide because I think scouting can really set your team up. But we talked a little bit before we hopped on air. Sometimes you can over scout, and I think it's going to be important that we talk about just how to be effective when scouting and helping your players be prepared.
Last time we joined together, we talked about exit interviews, and one of the topics of that was if you enjoyed doing the exit interviews or if you felt like it was a task that you just had to do as a part of your program. And I'll ask you the same thing about scouting. Is scouting something that you actually enjoy doing, or do you just feel like it's kind of a necessary part of coaching?
I love scouting. I think huddle's one of the greatest inventions of all time for coaches. You know, you can honestly get lost in huddle and just watching film and you can see 10 different games that teams played and we got to the point where we were using huddle assist and getting all the data and the stats from other teams. So I think it's essential. I think it's something that coaches, if you are a good coach, you are probably spending a lot of time on scouting and really taking preparation seriously.
Yeah, we've got coaches of all levels that would be watching a stream like this, from youth coaches to middle school coaches, a freshman coach, a varsity coach, maybe even a college coach. When do you think scouting really becomes essential part of what you're doing? As my background being a high school varsity coach, scouting was always a heavy part of what we were doing, but
Yeah.
it might not be applicable at certain levels. Where do you think that really comes into play as something that provides value
Yeah.
for your team?
I mean, I think it applies at all levels, to be honest. If if you're coaching junior high, middle school, I still think there's been some good coaches I've been around that will go scout. Not necessarily have film, but they'll, maybe go
Sure.
catch a game or go see a Saturday tournament, if they have a day off. So I don't think it's limited to what level you are. But like I said, I think the better coaches I've been around really take scouting seriously and really just treat it as another, overall piece of the preparation. I've been around some really, really talented coaches that almost are calling out plays, before they
Yeah.
happen, or
Yeah.
and are really, really detailed and prepared before games. And I think that only helps you.
Yeah, I would say that I think the level, it really depends on if scouting is going to be essential for you, the time and preparation that you have. If you only have two practices a week with your sixth grade travel team, you can only teach your players so much, and you want to spend your time on certain things. So I think with more access to preparation for your team, that allows for more avenues to use scouting successfully within your program. So I would say it probably starts to get up into the high school level before you can really make a major impact with your scouting. But I think at all levels you want to be paying attention to your opponents and collecting information so that you can help your team, even if it's just like we know they play zone on baseline out of bounds, or we know
Yep.
this kid is a really good player. It doesn't have to be an entire scouting report or you're watching multiple games, but having just a little bit of heads up on certain things, I think, can go a long way. Um, do you think that it's possible to over scout an opponent, Coach?
Yes. Yes. Like I said, we've hit on this before, but I think you can under scout, but I think it's even on the flip side. I think you can over scout. And I think sometimes coaches think, hey, if I go have every play diagrammed and I have every set they run and we are over prepared, that is, essentially going to help in games. And I've often found that, high school players, they can only retain so much and over the course of maybe 2 days that you're scouting or going over a game plan. So if you're giving them 40 different sets and all these things and just cramming this information, sometimes it can be overkill. And those things might come up one time in a game. But yeah, you can definitely over scout. We used to call it paralysis by analysis. You're spending all this time on the analysis, and it eventually kind of like hinders you because you're spending so much time on it. But I think there's kind of a middle ground. You definitely don't want to under prepare or under scout, but I do think some coaches sometimes go overboard and just, there's just too much information for a player to realistically take in 2 days in preparation for a game.
Yeah, the question is about over scouting, and you can definitely over scout. I know because I've done it many a times. It is a part of a personality flaw that I have, is to feel like, honestly, like I want to do right by the kids and do right by the community so much that I want to take every piece of information possible in to try to transfer that into a game plan. And there is definitely a point of diminishing return. If you're on like your
Yeah.
sixth or seventh or eighth game film of watching a team play, you really are not picking up too much new stuff at
Yeah.
that point. But I can definitely refer back to parts of my early coaching career where we would have, an hour and 15-minute bus ride up to Cleveland, and I'm trying to cram an extra film on the way up to the game. And during the JV game, I got my laptop open and I'm trying to watch another quarter on 2x speed or something like that. I feel like at that point, I'm kind of just trying to keep myself calm as opposed to really gaining
Yeah.
any new information that's actually going to help our team play. But definitely there's diminishing returns when you get excessive with the scouting. And what we're really talking about is not necessarily the information that you take in as a coach, but the information that you're able to distill down, give to your players, and that's useful to your players. So I think there's a point where you taking in a lot of information can be valuable and also have diminishing returns. But really what you put in front of your players matters a lot more than how much preparation you've done. And I think that is where the failure comes in with scouting, is that coaches really overdo it in what they present to their players. And I can remember times early in my coaching career where I would be giving them pages and pages of a scouting report that had all these diagrams on it. And the players don't want to read a diagram, and they can't really transfer that information. So I can vividly remember a point in my coaching career where I decided my scouting reports to our players were going to be 1 page long. That's it. And sometimes I had to cram down to about 8 font to fit everything I wanted to on 1 page, but I stuck to that from that point on, where I wasn't giving them a whole packet of information. Basketball is best played as an instinctual game. When players are thinking more, they are playing slower. And there's a fine line between overloading them with information where they're constantly trying to process too many things at one time, and they're not spending enough time actually just playing the game that's in front of them. So, yeah, if you have any response to that, I'd love to hear it, Coach.
Yeah, that sounds identical to me. I think early in my career, I would have these 4-page packets, and hand them, and you need to study these inside and out and know every tendency and every set. And realistically, they're not going to retain all that information, and in the flow of the game, are they going to remember back to the 3rd page of the scouting report? Probably not. And I got a funny story. I had a college coach who he was certain we were not reading the scouting reports, and we weren't because they were, really long, and we were on kind of a losing skid. And so it had to be like page 3 of the scouting report. He wrote in, "If you get this far, text me." And we show up the next day, and he's like, "Hey, did everybody read the scouting report?" And we're all like, "Oh yeah, coach, we got it. We read it." And he's like, "How many of you texted me last night?" And everybody's kind of looking around. And I think maybe one player out of the whole group had texted him. And he's like, "All right, let's look at page 3, and it just kind of proved the point, yes, we probably should have been reading the scouting report, but it proved a point to me, like, hey, long term, you probably need to have shorter scatter reports. We don't need to have 5-page, detailed scatter reports. So that's always kind of a little trick. But I've changed over, my course, my career to just be very, very just straight to the point. We would do 2 pages. So we would do front and back. 1 page would be team, maybe sets or team tendencies, and then the backside would be individual, players. So we
Yeah.
got it down to a front and back page. We would always we actually updated and started using Fast Scout, which is part of the Fast Model Sports. If any coaches, if you do have the fundraising, it is a cost to your program. But we found it was just, maybe my last 3 years of that I've used it was just vital. I mean, once you develop a good template on it, man, you can really just knock out those scouts really, really quickly with the team tendencies, the individual tendencies, and then something you can easily repeat and the players know what to expect.
Yeah, I would say with that little experiment that your college coach ran, there should probably be reflection on both ends of that as far
Yeah.
as changing tactics for what they do. And I feel like the coach would obviously feel like these guys, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And there's probably a reason for that. And he's got those same players in the locker room. No matter how much he nags them, they're going to be the same people that they are. And they might go back to they might change their habits for a game or two, but they are who they are. And they've told you that what you've given them is too much. And it's probably on the coach to adjust at that point. An interesting question here I wanted to pose to you with scouting. If you're focusing so much on the opponent, do you ever lose focus on yourself? What is the kind of the balancing act of paying attention to your opponent, but also making sure you're staying true to your identity as a team?
Man, that's a great question. I think you really can. I think you can spend so much time on an opponent, what they might do, and you lose sight of, hey, if we execute our sets, yes, you need to know how they guard ball screens or maybe what defensive changes they make. But overall, I think there is something to be said about just being focused on you. You definitely need to know player tendencies. Hey, is he a shooter? Is he a driver? And those things. But I think if you are true to your principles defensively, it shouldn't matter, right? Okay, so we're going to guard them the way we guard. You're not going to make these monumental changes. You may play a team that's shooting 20% from three and say, hey, we need to kind of back up a little bit more and play for the drive. But I think that is a good point you just made. I think it's you do need to make sure you're always focused on yourself and what you do, your strengths, your weaknesses. And you can sometimes focus too much on the opponent. I think early in my career, one thing that I kind of lost sight was if we beat a team by 5 and then I went and scouted and that team that we just beat, if they beat somebody, I would almost be like, oh, well, we beat them by 5, so we should beat this other team. And those things have no correlation, right? It's a whole new game. It doesn't transfer. And I did a poor job of oh, we beat them by 5, so we're better than this team. And it's a completely different game, completely different matchup. And I think sometimes you can get lost in that, and it almost gives you a false sense of how this game is going to go. So yeah, I definitely think always focus on yourself, focus on, the things you can improve and your program truths that you do defensively or offensively, and not lose sight of that by getting caught up in the opponent.
Yeah, I think the ultimate framework that you want to work in with this scouting report is you're identifying the things that your opponent does and factoring in how that affects you doing what you need to do. For example, I use the Euroball screen offense as our base offense my first 5 years of coaching. How teams defended a ball screen variously was very important in how we executed our offense. We needed to know what coverages we were going to see so that we could react to them. We didn't want to go set our first ball screen of the game and not know if the team was going to switch or go under or blitz it. We want to prep the players to be able to handle that. So I think you want to really take the framework of our opponent does this, and here's how we're going to react to it. They run this tempo press, and here's how we're going to run our scheme against it, and really preparing the mindset for how to attack the things that they're going to do, not necessarily just setting them out there and having them be things that players need to process themselves. But here's our reaction to the things that our opponent does. So, Coach, I've popped up onto the screen a sample report of what I would send someone out to scout an opponent for me. So if I was sending my JV coach or a freshman coach or a middle school coach or somebody that I knew, I would send them this document. It's a very generic document, but basically it's going to help them collect information for me to try to use to put together a scouting report. I had a hard time delegating scouting. I trusted my own eyes. I knew how to process the things that I was seeing, and it's hard for me to give that give that away to another coach. So I did a lot of the scouting. Just that's my personality. I know coaches that do very little scouting, and I know coaches that delegated most of the scouting out to different coaches. And I would imagine that comes down to the comfort level a head coach has with the coaches that are working with them. But I kind of wanted to talk through what would be kind of your step-by-step process when you're watching a game and how you're putting information on paper to later distill that into a scouting report. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think we definitely had a system of, what are their three strengths, and then what are their three weak points, things that we can attack. So we would do kind of an overall view of the team. Like I said, keep it to three. We definitely would look at individual players. Who are their go-to guys? What can we do to shut them down? But yeah, just overall, if you're sending somebody, you're just wanting them to give you just, like I said, overall notes. What are the three things they do well? What are the three things we can attack? And yes, they're taking individual notes here and there, play calls, sets, things like that. But yeah, we would keep it pretty generic. And I was like you, I wasn't just going to send a JV coach and just say, hey, good luck and trust them.
Yeah.
I was usually going with them to the game, and we would both take notes at the same time, or, I would watch film on Huddle if they were going to see it live. So, I was pretty much like you in that regard too.
Yeah, so let's run through this real quickly. And what I'm asking for here is, get a feel for the team, notice trends. Notice strengths and weaknesses, things like that. I really liked how you said distill it down into three things, because I don't want some diarrhea stream of consciousness of all these different things. Like you got to boil it down for me. Do some rating. Is this a weak rebounding team, a weak shooting team, a weak ball handling team? That's all going to tell me something. That if a coach goes and watches a team and they're throwing the ball around the gym, I can start to think about, okay, what pressure tactics can we pull out of our bag to, really put a spotlight on their ball handling? Or if this is a poor shooting team, can we really pack the paint a little bit more? So you're trying to find out things like this. And then this part right here is what you were talking about. Provide an overview and boil it down into like three things. So now we're getting into schemes. What defenses did they play? That, it might be a man, it might be 2-3 zone, it might be press. And then you're understanding, where their priorities are and what their primary defenses are by basing it off this kind of percentage here. And then this is where you're getting into what were the specific schemes that they used. You're asking about the energy of the team. You're asking about the atmosphere in the gym. You're asking who is providing the leadership for the team, which can be usually is different than who the leading scorer is or things of that nature. Make observations. Is this a team that's a guard heavy team or an interior heavy team? And, things like that. So a primary ball handler is certainly a point of that you want to identify, because, you can really cut the head off a snake if you can identify a primary ball handler that can be rattled or is more of a secondary ball handler that's thrust into a primary role. And, we're getting into now individual player evaluations here, where you're thinking about the individual players and how all these little intangibles relate to how you would want to approach matching up, and also the schemes that you choose there. So I have one of these that's blank, which is what we're looking through. And then I'll pop one up here that's going to talk a little bit, that's going to show actually what it would look like filled out. So first thing, if you're popping a film open, or if you're watching a game, what's kind of the first thing that you would be looking for, Coach, to identify?
Yeah, I definitely think those little details that you pointed out are really important. What's their leadership like? Who's their leader? Do they have any hotheads? Do they
Yeah.
have anybody that,
Yeah.
can get out of control, or, will take bad shots? I think that's important to identify. And then, you and I hit on this a little bit before the stream. I was probably guilty of this, of I would watch a lot of film, and during COVID, stopped going to live games as much. And I think it's super vital to go see games live. And you notice how quick somebody is. You notice how physical or athletic a team is. And I think sometimes on film, you don't quite see it. But if you're sitting there live, you can tell, and sometimes it goes the opposite way. Sometimes people lie, and everybody lies on their roster height, and everybody's listed at 6'7", and then I'm 6'3", so I'm standing there by the layup line. I'm like, these kids are as tall as me. They're not 6'6", like, and so I think it is vital to go see some games live if you can, just because you probably get a better sense of how physical they really are, and what they look like in person versus on film. So yeah, those other characteristics I think are important too. Like you said, not just like how many points they're scoring. It's like, who is the leader? Who is a hothead? Who is somebody that takes bad shots? And can you adjust for that?
Yeah. I'd like to look at a filled out scouting report that I received back. And before that, I'd kind of be interested to hear from you. How many games do you think you need to see a team personally before you really understand them? And also, what is the most amount of film you've probably ever watched on one single opponent?
I would say, to start your question, I would say the 3 most recent games tell a story, right? Yeah. Sometimes you watch a game, and they played 2 months ago, and it's like, this isn't the same team. That was 2 months ago. There's so much different. So I would say the 3 most recent games is probably your sweet spot. But I've gone 4 or 5 films, recent films on a team before, to really just see how they play. Overkill. I've definitely watched, as we've gone into the tournament, we've gone into sectionals. I've definitely watched, where we got the bye. There was 2 years where I had almost 2 weeks to prepare. Yeah. Okay. So we got the draw on a Sunday. We had one more game, and then we didn't play. We didn't play until the following Tuesday. So we really had almost 2 weeks. Yeah. And so, I would go crazy and probably watch every game they played. I would probably watch literally 25 games. And that's overkill. You shouldn't do that. It didn't help. I can tell you, it didn't make any difference. But yeah, that's probably the most I've done, is where I had like a 2-week break and I just went crazy and probably watched every single play they had the entire season. But yeah, I think the sweet spot's probably the 3 recent games, maybe 4 or 5 recent games, but you don't want to overdo it. And like I said, you don't want to get caught up in something that happened a couple months ago. I would watch recent games and how they're playing now.
Yeah, I think 3 games, you got a real good beat on what the opponent's about. And I think it really depends on what you can get your hands on. I know things are becoming more digital now, where there's more access, but there was a lot of times in my coaching career, particularly early in my coaching career, where you take the film that you can get. You might not be able to get the most recent film. And you build connections up so that you can do favors for coaches, and they'll do favors for you. Yeah. They might just trade you intel instead of an actual video or something like that. But it's kind of a complicated web of connections behind the scenes, trying to gain as much information as you can.
I'll tell you, each state is different. And this is so odd. Like in Indiana, we have a very good culture within coaches of trading film. It is just kind of standard. You contact that coach, or you contact them on Huddle, and you just say, hey, here's our 3 most recent games. Send us your 3. And I've almost had 99% coaches will just trade film straight up. Or if you ask their other opponent, who they just played, they'll send you the film. Yeah. But I've seen one year we were playing a team, Trotwood. Is there a team in Ohio, Trotwood?
Yeah. Trotwood, Madison.
we were trying to get film on them. We played them in some like, holiday classic, and it was weird. Like we couldn't get film on them. All
Yeah.
these teams in Ohio were really like, oh, they're in our conference. We have a rule. We don't trade conference film. And it was like all these kind of weird rules that we weren't used to. So I think we ended up getting like one game film that was on YouTube of them.
Yeah.
And luckily we found it because they were like full court press and like playing super fast. And so it really helped us prepare. But yeah, and then, I've seen states like Wisconsin. I remember they used to have people up like with a camera filming games, and people were like, hey, what are you doing? They're like, oh, I'm from Wauwatosa West, and we have no one trades film up here, so we have to send somebody ahead and they film the game with a camcorder, and then they take it back to their coach. So it's like it's different state by state. I would hope, like in today's day and age, like you said, develop relationships. You're gonna get film regardless. I think it's just kind of common courtesy just to trade and just say, hey, we'll give you our last 3, you give us your 3. You're gonna see it anyway, and it just saves a lot of time and hassle.
Yeah, when I started my coaching career, I was at St. Thomas Aquinas, and we were not in a league. We were independent, and it was completely wild, wild west of scouting because you weren't playing teams twice a year like in a league. You were playing all these random teams just to fill out a schedule, and that was a grind trying to do scouting for 22 individual games. We eventually joined a league that made things a lot easier, where we were playing some of the same teams twice. It made things easier from a scouting standpoint. It didn't make things easier from a playing standpoint because the league that we joined had some state powerhouses in it. But that made it a little bit simpler to scout. And then when I changed jobs and I went to a big public school, we eventually just went to Huddle, and it was you uploaded your film to Huddle, and the league coaches had fair game to download those. So really all you had to worry about was your non-league games. And then there was just an understanding that you weren't sharing film from other teams to opponents or something like that, which everybody really respected. So I will tell you that in my first year of coaching as a head coach, we made it to regionals, and it was the first time that the school had been to regionals in like 10 years. We got there. We were kind of happy to be there. And, we lost our first regional game, but we were building a powerhouse program. We there was more to come from our team, and we got back the next year to regionals. We weren't just there, happy to be there at that point. We were there to win games, and we won both of our regional games, and we made it to state. So in Ohio, at this time, you had to win 2 games. It would be 2 games at sectionals and 2 games at district. Those would all be in the same location. Then there was 2 regional games, which were in a different location. And then there was 2 state games that were in Columbus. So we're on this wild ride where we made it out of regionals. We made it to the state for the first time in 30 years. And we got up to the state tournament, and we won our first game. And we were underdogs. I couldn't believe that we won. I had very little preparation done for the team that we were playing in the state finals. And I'm scrambling. I'm walking around Columbus like a celebrity. We're about to play in the state finals, and I got basically very little information on the team that we're about to play. I'm calling around and getting a bunch of dead ends. All the teams in their area are like respectfully declining to share film on the team that we've got to play. And I was running out of options, and I asked the coach. I saw the coach, I think in person, that had just lost to the team we were about to play in the state finals. And this guy is like, oh, I hate those MFers here. And he unloaded like all this film, all his scout, everything onto us. And I had like 12 hours to prepare something for the game. But we went up there and we played it. We played a team called Convoy Crestview, and it was the first team in Ohio high school history that ever went 30-0. And as you can tell, the ending of the story ends with them winning the state championship. But yeah, they They had just lengthened out the season from 20 games to 22 games. So when the limit was 20 games, the most games that you could win was 28, where you could win 20 regular season, and then if you took no bye, you would win 8 and you could be 28-0. But they expanded the season length to 22 games. So if you won all 22 of your regular season games and then didn't take a bye, you could go 30-0. So this was the first team ever in Ohio to go 30-0. We hung with them for a half. I think we were down 2 or 3 at halftime. They kind of blew our doors off in the second half. But I can vividly remember just feeling like, I got nothing on this team that we've got to play, and we got all the marbles on the line here. So
that reminds me 2 times. There's only been 2 times in my career, and it was both when I was an assistant coach, where you're scouting, and I'd love to hear your opinion or stories on this, where you're scouting and in about 15 minutes, we don't have a chance. Like, this is going to be bad. I was an assistant coach at Franklin Central, and we had some good squads, and I think we really overachieved. We won our sectional, we got into regional, and we played a team that they had beat us by 35 in the regular season, just like destroyed us. It was embarrassing. We ended up beating them. So we have this great victory. We win. And then I think one of the teams we had to play was Romeo Langford. I don't know if you remember him from Indiana. He went to IU and got drafted. He's like an Indiana legend. One of the all-time leading scorers in Indiana history. And we had to go up against him. And it's like, coach, our head coach is like, what are we going to do? Like, I don't know about this one, coach. We had a good season. It's been a real good season. And then there was another time, a kid that went to Xavier named Travion Blewett. He was in Indianapolis, and he could score like 40 a game. And our coach is like, what are we going to do? I'm like, pray. Like, he's going to get 40 on us. So did you ever have any games where you're scouting and you're just like, I don't know. It doesn't matter what I put up on this board. This team is probably going to beat us.
Yeah, that was one of the interesting things. Early in my coaching career, I was at St. Thomas Aquinas, and we had to just fill out a schedule. Like, we were not in a league, so we'd have to get 22 games, and the competition level between those 22 games would vary greatly, between games that we would walk out there and do whatever we wanted and win, to games that we were severe underdogs. But we joined a conference called the North Coast League that had Cleveland Central Catholic, had Villa Angela St. Joe's, had all these other private schools that were state powers, that were legitimately winning the state title. We had one year where I think, there were 7 teams in our conference, and like 6 of them won their district championship, and 4 of them were at states in different divisions. And this is when there was only 4 divisions too. So it was, an unbelievable conference. But coaching in that, there was like 6 games a season where you knew you were playing. We had pretty average. We had good players. Maybe one kid that would go play Division II or Division III basketball, and we were playing against the Villa Angela St. Joe's team that had 5 guys that were going to Division I, one going to Ohio State, one going to Kansas, one going to Northwestern, and it's like, one of these things is not like the other here. So I actually enjoyed those situations because I felt like there was no pressure. Like, everybody watches this game and they see there are 6-foot average kids against 6'9" freaks. And if we can even hang in the game, let alone win, it's good for our program. So I like that. Sometimes when those games get out of hand, it's hard to coach in them. But I always felt like playing a heavy schedule and playing teams like that are state powers, you get to see what the bar is. And, the opportunity to pull one of those upsets can really elevate your program status. So I feared the games where we were like, just a little bit better than the other team, or it could go either way, more than like when we were a big underdog. I didn't mind being an underdog because I could know, we could try to manage possessions, we could try to keep the game close, and if it was even close, it would look bad on the other team, not for us to lose the game. So let's hit a comment here. I have Coach coming in here saying, in Kentucky, most schools utilize huddles. Some media outlets live stream games as well. Most schools are cooperative and send you film if you struggle to find it. So that's good. And I think that this has changed with COVID, where so many of the games are now streamed on YouTube. There's a lot more availability digitally. So I would guess that probably how things have trended in the last 4 or 5 years has made it a lot easier to find film on teams. But it's always nice when people are just nice about it, as opposed to, making you scramble and get into your Rolodex to really get a game plan together.
Yeah, I've only had it happen one time. We were trying to get film on an opponent, and it was one of those Friday Saturdays. The team we were playing played Friday. We were going to play them Saturday. So Friday night happens, and I'm trying to get the film from this other coach, the opponent, and he won't reply on huddle, won't reply to email. And I'm like, what's going on? So I got a hold of some other coaches. I'm like, hey, can you call him or text him? And the guy replied, and he's like, I don't like Coach Ashworth. And I'm like, I've never talked to this man in my life. I don't know him. I don't know why he doesn't like me. Like, maybe there was something that happened. I don't know. But this guy, refused to share film with me. And it was funny. I ended up just calling, the coach that we were getting ready to play and just said, hey, they're being difficult. We'll send you whatever. And we got it anyway. Yeah. But I've only had it happen one time. And it was a coach who, he said he didn't like me. And I swear I'd maybe met the guy or talked to him one time in my entire life. So it does happen. But yeah, you're right. Most of the time you can find the game on streaming. Most schools have YouTube channels now. You can find it. And like I said, I think it's common courtesy to just share or get it from an opponent. Like, there's no secrets out here. You're not running some secret offense that no one's ever seen before. They're not running anything you haven't seen before, probably. It's just share your 3 most recent games and, may the best team win.
Okay, so moving on here, Coach, we looked at kind of a blank template for how a coach might record notes when they're scouting. And this is what a filled out form might look like. And you're always asking them to grab, if there's like a media guide or if there's a roster or something like that, grab that, because that solves a lot of problems in identifying, heights and ages and grades and names and things like that. So,
and tell them to make edits on these, because like I said, people always lie. It is the worst case of lying is every basketball roster, because every kid gets up there and he's like, oh, I'm 6'5". So tell them sometimes, if you have an assistant coach, like, make edits. Like, is this kid really 6'5" or is he 6'3"? Is this point guard, is he 6 foot? I've seen a million 6 foot point guards that were not 6 foot. They just didn't want to put a 5 by their name. They wanted the 6-0. Yeah. So sometimes it's important for them to make that adjustment and give you the real heights.
Yeah, so looking at the form here, you might identify some things that you can take advantage of if somebody thinks that there's a poor shooting team or a poor ball handling team. In particular, those are always things that I pounced on. Identifying different defenses. It's always nice if you get something like this where it's like they played 100% man, straight man, no traps, no nothing like that. And then you can really keep your focus there. And then, you're asking all these questions, trying to identify who's the heartbeat of the team, who's the primary scorer. But getting into these individual players, sometimes this can be a little bit rough. Looking at each individual kid, you're asking somebody while they're watching a game to make all these different evaluations. So I don't know that this is an exact science, but I think you can pick up on some things if some of the numbers reflect a lot different than the others. If you see something like this where it's all kind of, it's all 4 or 5 ranked out of 5. But if you see something where it's like, athleticism is 1, that's something that we might be able to pick up on. But when I was watching games, I wouldn't use a form like that. I didn't want to feel like personally, like I was like boxed in by the form. I didn't want to feel like I was trying to fill out a form. I wanted to have like a stream of consciousness notes going down on paper. So basically, I would just have one side of the paper be individuals and one side be team. And anything that was like a team-related scheme, I'm putting on that side of the paper. And then any notes on individual players, I would have on the other side of the paper. And what I would be writing is like, If they took a 3-point shot, like I want to be able to identify that they are a willing 3-point shooter. And then based on if they're making them or not, I can identify if they're like a shooter that needs special attention, needs a harder closeout, may need a face guard or something like that. But I like to note if they slash to the basket. So I would just write like slash if the kid went to the basket, and then I would put right or left. And then if you're watching 3 games and you're using that same form, you can really pick up on things where it's like, okay, this kid has not slashed to the basket 1 time in 3 games. This player has slashed to the basket 12 times in 3 games, but he's gone right 10 out of the 12 times. That's where you're starting to pick up on trends and starting to identify things. So again, this form is like, I wanted a coach to go out and have something to fill out to send back to me. But when I'm doing this personally, I'm not filling out this form for myself. I'm making my own kind of notes in my own kind of shorthand language that only I understand. And I wouldn't ask somebody that didn't know my system to try to execute. But this is kind of what it looks like, the end game of what you're getting back. And then you're taking as much of this information as you can and trying to distill it. And you may just be able to take the form, or you may need to make a phone call and, what does this mean? Or what was your note here? But I didn't really want like them trying to diagram all the plays. But if you can identify certain actions, that can help you. Because if you have a day of practice, then we can work into shell drill. Okay, we need to practice against low cross screens because they're using a lot of those, or they're using a lot of stagger screens. We need to work against that. They're using a lot of on-ball screens. So as opposed to like knowing their offense or knowing their plays verbatim, understanding the actions that they use to try to create scoring opportunities, I think can go a long way here. So are you a form guy for scouting, or you got your own kind of language like me that you would make notes on?
Yeah, very similar to like you said. I would have like a JV coach or an assistant coach with a form like this. And then I would just take in the game, make my own notes. A lot of times I would diagram certain sets if I saw them, especially out of bounds plays, just things that you could quickly diagram. But for the most part, I'm like you. I'm watching the game. I'm taking it in. I'm trying to just see the whole picture, see how they guard screens, pick up on their coach, the coach's calls, what are they doing? Instead of just filling out a form. I think it's good to have it. And I do think if you do have an assistant with you, or you send an assistant, it is important for them to fill it out so you have it. But yeah, I was probably more like you, where just taking it in, maybe making my own notes that are just like general points about the game or the team.
Yeah, my next question to you is, what details do you think coaches miss when they're scouting the most often? And while you're thinking of an answer there, I'll say that probably the thing that I don't think coaches recognize is there's some subtle things like teams that run a free throw break very consistently. If you're not paying attention, there might be a free throw break situation like 4 times in a game. And if you're got your head down writing notes and you miss it, you might not be able to pick up on something like that. And we're living in this Twitter age of everybody's posting these kind of fancy sets. I do it personally, where I'm kind of polluting the internet with all these fancy backdoor plays and elevator plays.
You have some good sets, man.
And that's kind of the downside of that is, if a team is watching you play and you run something like that, it's a head turner, and they're going to write it down, and it makes it harder to execute the next time you want to run it. So sometimes simple stuff that's effective might get overlooked, but if you do some fancy backdoor or elevator screen, coach is going to pick up on that real quickly. So what do you think might be some details that coaches miss in scouting more commonly than not?
I would say one thing is just like body language. I think body language is something you can pick up when you're watching live. Like, you see that player that's getting frustrated when they haven't taken a few shots, recently. They've gone 5 possessions and they haven't touched the ball. And you see that more live, and it starts to, okay, we can frustrate this kid if we can take the ball out of his hands. Or you see those little things like, how's this kid handle a press? How's this kid handle if we trap the ball screen, or we throw different things at him? I like out of timeouts. I think that's always big. what are their sets? What are they trying to do out of a timeout? Who are they trying to get the ball to out of a timeout? Some things too is what defense do they run out of timeouts? That's really helped me, where there was a really talented coach where every time, like, let's say I called a timeout, he knew I was drawing up a really good set. So he would change defenses. Well, I scouted him a few times. I started to realize, when we call a timeout, we're getting ready to draw up set, he's going to switch to 2-3 zone. He's not going to come out in man.
Yeah.
So that helped me. So then when I call a timeout in a game, I know he's going to change defenses. So now we're drawing up a 2-3 zone set out of bounds or some type of zone set. So like, I think those little details are important to try to pick up on in games, of what adjustments are coaches making. But I think body language, and just like you said, who's a leader for the team? Who's the head of the snake? Who can we cut off? Who will get frustrated if they don't get a couple shots? Who's a hothead that we can get worked up to take some bad shots? Like, I think all those things are important that when you're watching.
Yeah, you mentioned coaches changing schemes out of timeouts. And I had a point in my coaching career where I figured out that if you had a few concepts in your playbook that work just fine against man or zone, those are great concepts to call coming out of a timeout. And you don't really need to worry about what the opponent is doing. And for example, there's a baseline runner concept where you kind of have a 2-guard offense. You have 2 posts on the block, and then you have a guard running corner to corner. Well, you could use that concept against man-to-man to kind of feature your shooter running off baseline screens. You can use that concept against a 1-3-1 half-court trap. You can use that concept against the 3-2 zone. And if you go to something like that, then you're not in this point where you draw up this nice back door play in your huddle, and all of a sudden you come out in there in 2-3 zone and you're scrambling to call something else. So that was kind of a realization. And I think having 2 or 3 concepts like that in your playbook that you can go to, that function across multiple types of defense, can be a real nice place to use them as coming out of timeouts. So Coach, we'll jump into, we looked at kind of how to compile information. And what I wanted to show next was, what the output would be from those notes that we took a look at. So this is a sample scouting report, and we're playing Villa Angela St. Joe's here, but we're taking all that information that we've collected through different games, and we're boiling it down into, what's their main offense, and just a brief description of that. What sets do they use? They use back screens, they use overloads, they use the back door. And we're not trying to diagram it specifically for what it is, but we want to know the actions, because I can talk about, with they're running back screens here. So we have to make sure we're bumping the cutters when that cut's going to the rim or things like that, or they're going to overload us. So there's going to be some tricky spots for our low eye to have to make rotations. So you guys really need to have great vision of the ball and vision of the court on defense, so we can make a long rotation if they put us in an overload, things like that. They run a lot of backdoor plays, so we really need to make sure we're seeing ball, seeing man, and we're not overcommitting to passing lanes, trying to go for steals, because they'll bait you into an overplay for a backdoor. So it's not the specific play, but more the action that we'll see. So against zone, here's how they'll react. What do they do on their baseline out of bounds? What do they do on their sideline out of bounds? And here's our plan of attack. We have these different options at our disposal, and I'm saying, here's the things that I think we're going to lean into this game, which would be our man-to-man defense, our 2-3 zone, and 0 would be like a switch everything man-to-man call. So we would have a 1-3-1 half-court trap. And what the players can understand from this is, this doesn't look like a game we're going to throw the 1-3-1 trap out. We've got these kind of concepts that I think are going to work the best for us here. So again, getting into their defense, this is how they play defense. And, we're going to counter that in certain ways. They'll extend the pickup point. They'll change their ball screen coverage, which is pretty unique for the high school level. I didn't see a lot of teams that could run 3 different ball screen coverages. And, my teams personally, we usually would have like a main ball screen coverage and then a secondary ball screen coverage. But having 3 ball screen coverages at the high school level is pretty advanced stuff. What zones might they play? What presses might they play? How are they going to defend baseline out of bounds? And then, here's our plan. We're going to run our motion offense. We're going to run our ball screen offense. We're going to use our horns set play package. We're going to use our slice set play package. And then we're going to use this as a ball screen offense as well. So getting into personnel here, Coach, now we're looking at the players and then these initials here, kind of how we'd want to match up with them. So we might be talking about when we substitute, how the matchups would change, but we're identifying who we want on each person. And from those notes where you're talking about if a player is a willing three-point shooter versus a slasher versus which direction they go, then you're compiling this into like single words where it's like driver, shooter, pull up, nice handle. Nothing drive me crazy when I get a scouting report from another coach and they're writing like a paragraph about a player. And it's like, Robinson is a nice junior player who's been starting for 3 years and he likes to do, and it's like, no, we need like 5 words to describe them. We can't be doing sentences and paragraphs, put it all into one line here. So we're going to boil all this stuff down into the keys to the game, which in this case are, we need to cut hard in our offense. We need to control tempo and shot selection, particularly early in the game. We need to limit their star players in terms of their production. And then just a couple game goals that emphasize that. Like if we're committing 11 turnovers, we really give ourselves a chance to win this game, as opposed to if we commit 20 turnovers, this is going to be a blowout. It's going to be lights out, not in our favor. And, take 2 or more charges. So this is me boiling all that information down into one page. And I didn't have to go to 8 font. This looks like about 10 font. And I even went big with the logos on this one. So I had plenty of room to spare to fit on my one page. Is this what a scouting report might look like on your end, or how would it differ, Coach?
Yeah. Like I said, I think there was probably a 5-year segment where it was really like this. As of late, like I said, we used Fast Scout, which I loved because you could most of it would connect to max preps as well. So if a team had their stats on max preps, you actually could just bring it over from those max prep stats. So it would populate the players, their stats. It was very, very convenient. And if it didn't, then I would go in there and physically type those in. But yeah, I would have individual players, team tendencies, try to keep it front and back one page. That's it. And like you said, I used to give dissertations on players like, he will drive right, spin left. His go-to moves are this, and you're like, is that really going to come up in the game? No, they just need to know what is he good at. And so we eventually we actually went to a color code system, which I loved, where red is dead. Red is like, they are a dead eye shooter. So we would actually put like in their name, like red, like this kid we cannot let him shoot. Mm-hmm. Yellow was like, we used like a stoplight, like yellow is like, they could kind of shoot it. And so like the players would kind of understand like the different color schemes. And then what was funny is they would always argue with me in practice what I would scout them as. Like my own players would be like, hey coach, am I a red shooter? And I'm like, you're probably more of a yellow. They would get all upset and be mad, and we would joke around. But yeah, we would almost color code, this guy's a shooter, or he's a driver, or he's capable. Yellow is like, you still need to be there on the catch. He's a capable shooter. But red is like, if he's shooting a 3, I might sub you out because he shouldn't even be getting a shot off. So we would color code it. But yeah, I really like this idea of just like 5 words to describe this kid. These are his strengths. And that's what a high school kid will take in. A high school kid's not reading, the scout's got 10 players, 9 or 10 players. They're not reading 9 paragraphs on these kids and retaining all that. Give them the 5 things they do well and they need to stop.
Yeah, I was never big on watching film with players. I felt like that was a tremendous waste of time, and I felt like it could give the players a false sense of security because, as we talked about earlier, the film can lie sometimes. And if the team that we're playing is playing somebody else that's really good, they might not look as good on film as they
Oh yeah.
actually are. So I never liked having just running film and having players watch it. But with a report like this, it would always come with some kind of on-court portion where we might walk through some of the plays and talk about some of these screens or actions and what they look like. So if we have a day of practice, that could be a little bit more detailed. If we had a home game, we would go to do a walkthrough pregame in our Ox gym. On away games, you're really counting on being able to do that on-court prep the day before. So that's where this gets tough is, you've got this report. You want to get it in your kids' hands the day before the game if you can. Obviously, that's not easy. If you're playing a Friday, Saturday, to sit there and have 2 scouts ready by Friday to go over one with the team and give them another for the game tomorrow, that's going to be difficult. So you do the best you can. You get it to them as early as you can. But I always wanted to have this paper, which I felt like I could cut shorter, especially if we had the opportunity to do an on-court portion where we could work on their actions in shell drill or do a walkthrough in our Ox gym while the JV team played. So, Coach, we're kind of through here. This is the deliverable to the players. We want to get them in their hands as soon as possible. How are you testing retention for what the players are absorbing from this?
Yeah.
This might go with like a whiteboard session where we put a very brief version of this on the whiteboard and we go over pregame. How are you kind of making sure they're absorbing the information?
We would always do a pregame practice. So if we played on Friday, Thursday is our pregame practice. And that's where we're going over these things. And a lot of times we would probably make like our JV team act as the opponent. And, it's funny. The JV kids love that because if you tell a JV kid, hey, he's averaging 20 points and he shoots it every time he touches it, they love that. They love being that kid in practice. So a lot of times, we would have our JV team almost be like the scout team. We'd have a coach or myself like drawing up their sets and going over them and do a little bit of live period where we're going over their actions or things that they like to do, or here's how they're going to guard us. So we would probably spend about 20 minutes of live, walk through and then go into like live action on our pregame days. That's how we would try to do it. Cause I do think there's something to be said about doing it like out on the court versus like showing it up on, film or showing it up on like a dry erase board. It's a lot different when you have to run through it and actually guard those actions. So we would do it a lot of the times in those pregame practices on Thursdays.
Tell me about your reaction to maybe a blatant disregard or a memory issue with a player in game where there's something that you've covered. Maybe you walk through, this backdoor play or this baseline out of bounds play. You get in the heat of the moment, and all of a sudden, there's a slip up happening, and you're giving away a bucket, even though you did the preparation and you prepped the players for it, and you're very clear on it. How do you react to that?
I think there's two. I have two stories. I think one is players have a tendency to take things very literally, right? You've had those players that's like, they take things literally no matter what's happening in front of their face. And so we've had scouts before where, we're going off of the numbers. Hey, this kid is 2 for 8 on the season. Yeah. So he's shooting, whatever, he's 20%. He's not a good 3-point shooter. So on the scout, we've said he's not a shooter. Well, as you know, basketball is a game of variance and change. The kid comes out and he hits his first 3 threes. And our kid, he's like, Coach, you said he's not a shooter. And then he lets him again come off and shoot again. And he hits his 4th 3. And I'm like, do you see he's hitting shots? And so like the kid could not break the conception of, you know, the scout said he wasn't a shooter. I'm like, he's hit 4 threes.
Yeah.
Screw the scout. It's out the window, you know, like adjust. And I think sometimes players get so caught up in the scout, they don't adjust to what's happening in front of their eyes. And, you know, okay, we said the kid wasn't a shooter, but he's hit 4 threes. So that's a story that always sticks out with me. And then we had that happen on the flip side. We had a kid who hadn't played a whole lot. And we were playing the #1 team in the state at the time. They had Braden Smith, who plays for Purdue right now.
Yeah.
And they were ranked #1. And we went into their building, and they were just a phenomenal team. And we had a kid coming off the bench who had gotten sick and hadn't played that much. And like, he had kind of struggled up until that point. And he comes out and he hits like, I think he goes 7 for 7 from 3. Like, doesn't even touch the rim. Just like could not miss. So we ended up upsetting them, beat the #1 team in the state. And some of my assistant coaches were good friends with their head coach. And after the game, he's like, yeah, our scout had him as a non-shooter, leave him wide open, don't guard him. And he came out and hit 7-3, went 7 for 7, and really helped us win that game. So like I said, sometimes you have to adjust in the game. You can't take the scout so literally that you don't adjust, because it could be wrong, you know, and you know, this kid that's shooting 20%, hey, he might be having a good game.
Yeah, I think that if you have a game plan devised and you've shown players certain things that you want to take away, if something does go wrong and they're not able to execute, it's really not the time to put them on blast, even though that's what you feel as a coach. It's like, we talked about this. Why are we, you know, that doesn't really do you any good. I think you have to make an evaluation where it's like, okay, is this kid's head just not in the game enough to have him out there? You know, that's a thought. But, you know, calling him out and, you know, embarrassing him in some way, you really can't do that. I think the biggest thing that you can do with these details is you want to be able to reinforce things. And I think through like your keys, like if you have keys on the scouting report, where it's like, these are the 3 things that are important. Those are the things that you want to keep talking about in huddles. You want to keep talking about your goals. It's not, I told you this guy was a shooter and you didn't close out on him, or I told you this and you didn't take away his right hand. It can't be that. It's got to be like, we reinforce the things that are the main points, and we do that over and over and over again. And if, you know, our goal, if we need to be at 12 or under turnovers to win this game, and we're at 8 in the second quarter, that is something to talk about. But it can't be, you know, the kid failed to live up to his expectation based on the report that you gave him. So that would be how the scouting report is delivered to the players, how to kind of reinforce what you want out of the players through that document. You know, you told me that you always really like to do the scouting yourself. Is that right, Coach?
Yeah, I always felt like I had trouble delegating it.
Yeah.
There were years where I had some really good assistants, and we would split up the season. You know, we would take 22 games and split it amongst, you know, 4 assistant coaches. But I was still on every scout and, you know, a part of it. But yeah, I think it depends on your staff and
Sure.
you know, the trust and the relationship you have with them and how good they are. But yeah, I always was kind of a control freak when it came to that. Like, I had to be on the scout. And you know, I think that's just personality. I think it just depends on who you are, how much you scout. That was just always me. I had to watch, you know, 5 films and know the scouting report in and out.
Yeah, I have the same kind of personality. And I'm thinking about, you know, is there a way to kind of delegating your scouting practice to a specific coach and let them kind of run wild on that? If that's something that you can effectively delegate to get that off your plate as a head coach, you know, there's so many things to focus on as a head coach. To be able to take a break from the scouting, that opens you up to do different things. Do you think there's a possibility to maybe train your assistant or your assistants to scout effectively, where it could be something that you'd be comfortable delegating off?
I think so. I think if you have a young assistant who wants to be a head coach one day,
Yeah.
I think you can put that in their hands and you just say, hey, this is something you will have to do eventually. It's good that you get this practice now, to really see how to scout teams, really find out, game plans and adjustments. And then even sometimes it's good to put them in front of the team and give them the opportunity to present the scout,
Yeah.
because they need that practice. If you have a 25-year-old, that wants to be a head coach and he's never stood up in front of a team and gave a scout, that can be a challenge once they become a head coach. So I think if you have the right people and the right coaches that you trust, I would say, go for it. Give them a chance to, make sure they're prepared. Don't just throw them in the ocean. But yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for young assistant coaches that want to be a head coach one day to take that on. And I encourage young coaches, like, go talk to your head coach. Say, hey, I really want to be a head coach one day. Is there anything I can do with scouting? Is there anything I can do with film prep? The more you volunteer and the more that you kind of show that you want to be a part of it, the head coach is probably going to feel more comfortable giving you more responsibility.
Yeah, I can think of this kind of current situation with Jerome Tang at Kansas State, where he's having a real hard time with his team right now for various reasons. And I don't know the exact details of it, but I do know that one of the things that he had talked about in his press conference was he assigned the scout for the next game to his team. His team was going to watch it. They were going to prepare it. And I would say if you were having struggles with your team, getting them to comprehend information that you were presenting to them, that might be something that could be interesting, where you're making them do the legwork. They're seeing the responsibility that goes into preparing the information. They're having to put all the information down, and I'm sure they are going to follow a scout that they prepared probably better than what the head coach could do. So I don't know the exact of the situation, but I do know I thought that was a good idea to make sure your team is really paying attention to the things that your next opponent does.
And I think sometimes it shows the players that, like, the work you have to put in as a coach, right? Like, they see, like, oh, this isn't as easy. Like, I have to sit down and watch 3 games and I have to see the plays they're running and and then I have to get up in front of the team and teach it in a way they'll understand, or present it in a way they'll understand. And sometimes it gives them a little perspective. I think that can be a good idea, especially if you are a senior led team or you have a lot of veteran players coming back and you trust their eye, you trust their judgment. I think sometimes it is good to hand it over to some players and say, hey, this is a conference opponent. These kids, you play AAU against these guys. You've played against these kids since you were in 3rd grade. Like, what's the scouting report on this kid? Is this kid a shooter? You've played him for 10 years. And a lot of times they can almost tell you the scouting report better than you can, because they know these kids and they've played against these kids. So I would encourage coaches. Sometimes that is a good idea. So give your players some responsibility from time to time.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. I wanted to pivot into kind of the season planning element of scouting. And what I have pulled up on the screen here is a scout plan, where particularly early in the season, before your opponents have played many games, you're really in a bind to try to get intelligence information, because if it's your first game of the year and their first game of the year, you haven't really had a chance to see them unless you're talking to the teams that they scrimmaged against or something like that. So you might be trying to find out who they scrimmaged and call those coaches to get that film. But particularly early in the season, scouting becomes very important. You don't want to be scouting games from last year. That can have some relevance in terms of like style of play, but you really want to know the individual variables here. But what we're looking at on screen is like, okay, this is our opener, and who's the teams that team has played before that we could contact through their scrimmage schedule. Who are teams that we can get film out? Who can we go see in person? Who can we get film from another coach that we know for sure? And you're just building out this plan. And you really only need to do this through about halfway through your season, especially if you're in a league once you're in league play, those games are kind of going to take care of themselves because you have so many common opponents. You're playing some of the same teams twice. There's so much availability of film from some of the other teams on your schedule. So you're really wanting to hone in on this early part of your season. And I guess I'm wanting to hear from you is like, how does your scouting evolve from early in the season into the middle, late, and postseason of play?
Yeah, see, in Indiana, it's a lot different. I wish it was based on conference play.
Okay.
I know a lot of other states where it's more structured like college, where you play, non-conference games. And then once you get into January or February, you're playing home and away, you're playing a lot of conference opponents. In Indiana, it's actually not like that. You're probably only playing, if you have a conference of 8 schools, you're only playing 7 conference games.
Okay.
So you don't get a true home and away. Like it
Oh,
just rotates each year where, okay, this year we play them at home. Next year we'll play them on. So you only play 7 conference games, which I hate. I think it should be structured like college where you play whatever 10 conference game or sorry, non-conference, maybe 8 non-conference. And then the end, of your season should be all conference games. And there should be a true conference champion where you played home and away. There's, an actual conference champion. But a lot of schools don't like doing that. I've heard different reasons like, yeah, you could play a team 3 times or 4 times, if you have a county tournament and then a sectional tournament, you could play the same team 4 times. I'm like, okay, like who cares? Like they do that in college. Like you could play a team 3 times. So what? But we don't have ranked based tournament play in Indiana. Like a lot of states, you don't play the teams right by you in the tournament because it's ranked. In Indiana, it's all based on location. So you're sectional, you're playing pretty much all the teams that are in your conference. It's kind of weird. So, for us, the whole season is like this. You do need to scout because you're only playing 7 conference games. And then the other 14, 15 games are non-conference and you need to be prepared, scout. So it's a little different in Indiana compared to a lot of other states. But yeah, ours would look just like this. You'd have the team, their recent games, who we can scout, who we can get film from. And it usually, and then we would even give like each coach like, hey, you have Akron East. I'm just looking at your list here. We're taking Hanover, and then you just split it up by coach. But yeah, it's super important to have this mapped out. Like I said, in Indiana, we have a great website. It's called John Harrell, where it has like every team's schedule, who they've played, and it has like all this data. It's like this unbelievable website for high school basketball. And then it'll even have like, what do you call it? Predictions. So it has like this data. Jeff Sagarin, who's this like data expert, he'll take all the games and like plug them in. It's really cool. It's a really cool system, but you could actually see like, oh, we're getting ready to play Akron East. Like, oh, we're a 5-point favorite based on, the previous 5 games. It's kind of, cool to see.
Yeah, I don't think anything like that exists in Ohio. That does sound like a great concept if somebody's willing to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, how far ahead are you thinking about scouting? If you've got a team, obviously it's really in coaching, you've got so much stuff to do. It's not like you can play a game and then look to the next game and you've got to start the process well before the team's in your sight line there.
Yeah.
So I guess how far ahead
thinking
are you?
out. Yeah, we're thinking 2 weeks out. Like if we're starting, if it's a Monday and we have a game Friday, we're getting that, we're spending, our week on that team, but we're probably already getting film for the next week.
Yeah.
So if we play, Mount Vernon the next week, we probably are getting some of their film already and starting to build that scouting report ahead of time. And then, spending a lot of time Sunday and Monday of that week, building the scouting report, the game plan. I know every coach their Sundays, you love coming home, but you're probably spending a lot of time doing scouting and watching film too on those Sundays. So yeah, we're usually probably 2 weeks out prepping, getting their recent games and seeing if they play live, anywhere close where you could go scout them. That's usually what we do.
Yeah, in my coaching career, I coached at a smaller private school for the first half of my coaching career and then moved on to a bigger public school. And the interesting thing with that is at the bigger public schools, a lot of the bigger schools are concentrated into the bigger cities. So the games were a lot closer in terms of like proximity and geography. But in some of the rural schools with the smaller school that I coached at, we might be in a district that's 45 minutes south, and we might be pulling teams that are an hour south of that.
Yep.
So you would be having to understand, like, if we're going to win our district, we need to beat this team. I'm going to say Wellsville because this is an actual team. But that was one of the funnest parts of coaching, was feeling like you were on a season-long stalk of this team that you knew you needed to get through to win your district. And they're way out there. It's an hour and 45 minutes to go watch them play. And I'm charting how many times can I go see them in person so that I can prepare to win the game. And we got situations like that where, you're spending an entire season scouting a team that you need to get through to reach your goals. Whereas you might have a game Friday, but Tuesday you're going to see some team you might not play 2.5 months from now, doing preparation like that. So if you're really organized and really understand the landscape that you're competing in, something like that can turn into something that's really fun for you and your coaching staff to go take these long trips together and think about the future instead of being so focused on what's right in front of you, which you have to do as a coach. You have to deal with the next practice, the next scout, the next game, that kind of thing. So to be able to think out into the future, I think can be really effective in terms of giving yourself a break and also doing preparation so you're not scrambling to do it like I was talking about early in my coaching career, where I was about to go play a state finals game and had zero intelligence on the team that we're about to play. Coach, I wanted to pivot into one of our last topics here. Have you ever heard of the idea of self-scout? Have you ever done that?
Yes. Yes. I actually made 2 notes about that throughout my career. I definitely love self-scout, scouting yourself or having the players scout themselves and say, hey, what would a team say about you? Be honest, or hey, scout your team, write down what an opponent would say about us. But one thing that I actually used to do, and you got to be careful with this, but I would actually go to the coaches that I had good relationships with. And I would go, hey, can I ask a favor? And they would say, what do you need? And I'd say, can you send me your scout? And not, don't send me like all your breakdowns of our offense and defense. Like, just send me what you have on our players. And I won't share that it's from you. And I loved getting those because you really could see like what opposing coaches felt about your team or your players. And sometimes it was worth sharing with players, hey, like, guys, I'm just going to read this. This is an anonymous opponent that we played. Here's what they said about, you pull a kid in and said, hey, our opponents don't think you're a shooter. There's a reason you're wide open. So when I'm saying that, it's not just me, it's, these 5 other opponents. So I've done that before where I've asked coaches to send me what they have on our players. And most of the time they're receptive. They'll send it to you. And I think that's always good to see. And then yes, self-scout's always good. You either do it yourself or, if you have, I think everybody has like a mentor or a coach they trust or somebody that's a retired coach. I used to always tell 2 people. One, my dad, because my dad was a Hall of Fame football coach, had a really good eye for scouting. And I would tell him, hey, come to a game and just sit up top and scout us and take notes. Like, what would you, if you were an opposing coach, what would you say? And then I had another long time, mentor coach who I would ask him to come to games and just give us a scout as if you were an opposing coach. And getting those notes and getting that feedback was always just super valuable because you really see like from a different perspective and a different set of eyes, maybe things that you didn't notice or you didn't see.
Yeah, I've done a few scouting report swaps with coaches that I was close with, where I'd say, "Hey, you send me your scout of us, and I'll send you, my scout of you guys." What I specifically refer to as a self scout would be like bringing in someone that's outside of your program to come and watch your team play and making a report about it, which I think has tremendous value. And like what you said, with a retired coaching friend that you have, is the perfect type of person to do that, because they pick up on things that you don't, because you're so close to things that you miss things. So if you have somebody that you trust, bringing them into a game, having them make a report and send it to you, I think it's going to be an eye-opening experience, because there will be things that you think you hang your hat on as a program and they won't even pick up on it in a scout. Or you'll have things that there's might be tension that you don't pick up on that they see from the sidelines, or they might notice, hey, your bench looks a little wonky. Why don't your guys look engaged? There's things that I can tell you as a coach, you are so in the weeds that you miss things because you're so close to it, that people from the
Absolutely.
outside have a better perspective on than you can have from your distance. So last couple questions here before we get off. Do you ever feel like there's a situation where scouting actually hurt your team's performance?
Um, I would say, like, kind of going back to one of our original points, is over scouting. I
Yep.
think early in my career, I almost think sometimes you scout for yourself. It makes you feel better about your coaching or yourself. Like, I'm so prepared. I have 5 pages of notes and I've watched 27 games.
Yeah.
And it's like, who are you really doing this for? Are you
Yeah.
really preparing your players? Or are you doing this, to calm yourself and to, whatever. And I think there were times earlier in my career where, like I said, I was handing out a 4-page report and it was just overkill. And then you get in the game and it's like the team sets a high ball screen. Can you guard a high ball screen?
Yeah.
Like, that's what it boiled down to. And you look back and you're like, God, I spent all this time on the scout and we should have just been working on guarding this high ball screen. So yeah, I definitely think I've had moments where I've over scouted and it's probably been to a detriment of our team. And I think there's a sweet spot. I think there's, I think each team has its own personality. I think some teams you can really get detailed scouts to them and they love watching film.
Yeah.
And then I think there's sometimes you have a team where after 15 minutes of a scout, they're bored, they're falling asleep. They don't want that. And they're still can be effective as a team. But each team kind of has a different personality each
You know,
year.
you know what, Coach? That's a great point. And that is part of like mastering coaching, is understanding something like that, where it's like, it's not about me. It's not about what I prepared and you can handle. Like, if you have a group that can handle as much as you can give them that much. But if you have a team that really can't function off of a lot of information, you need to dial it back. You need to tone it down. You need to meet them where they're at to put them in a position to win. Because I can tell you, I've definitely given too much information to my team and felt like it slowed them down at times because they were thinking too much. So I think that's part of coaching, where there's a debate that goes on. It's like, is conceptual offense or continuity patterns or set plays, what's the answer? And it's like, the answer is what your team needs. Your team might be great at conceptual offense, or they might be terrible at it. And if you're good at coaching it, you might be able to give them that and they can do it. But you might have a team that needs the flex offense, that needs a pattern. So I think part of coaching is like, we feel like we have these identities, and you're going to like push your identity onto your players, whether it's how you prepare a scout or how you run your offensive system. But really, the mastering coaching is about understanding your team and giving them the tools that they need to go out and perform their best, not saying, I do my scouts 5 pages and you guys need to understand 5 pages of information. And if you don't, you're not living up to your end of the bargain. You've got to learn from mistakes. You've got to understand your team. You've got to give them what they need. And that applies to practice as well, with the length of practice that you use, how competitive it is, the type of drills that you use. There's a crusade online right now where you need to be running your drills this way for the best benefit of your kids. And it's like, you don't know my team, brother.
Yeah.
My team
Yeah.
might need that, or they might need something completely different, but I can guarantee you there is not a master unlock of drills or concepts that are going to make each coaching situation reach its peak. There is not. So I always think of like, a coaching shouldn't be I am circle motion offense, I am 2-3 zone, I am this or that. It's like, what do we have here? How do we make it all work together? How do we make this kind? How do we use these ingredients to make the best recipe we can? Not what are this group of players going to look like in my offensive system that I'm absolutely married to. Coach, any thoughts
Yeah.
on my rant there?
No, you hit the exact points. I think that's growth as a coach. I think, when I came in as a young coach, I probably did treat it that way. You're going to do it my way. Our scouts are going to look like this. You have to practice like this. And that took some growth. That took some evaluation and realizing like, man, this group just doesn't do well in that. And then when I figured that out, and instead of saying, "Hey, we're going to work on ball screens for the next 20 minutes, we're going to break down," I would trick the team and say, "Hey, we're gonna play 3-on-3, and you have to set a ball screen. We're just going to play 3-on-3, and whoever scores the most stays." And you're getting the work that you need on ball screens, and you can stop when you need to, but they think it's a game. So now they're really competitive, and they're working on ball screen defense, and they think it's just a 3-on-3 game. So like I've had those moments, and then I've had teams where, we could go through 45 minutes of a scout and walking through the sets and the diagrams, and they would be locked in and like really remember the plays, and like they wanted to scout, and they could tell me the plays. And each team's different. Each team has a different personality. Each team has a different skill set, and I think great coaches can kind of tap into that. They figure out after a couple weeks, okay, this is what the team needs. This is what the team's strengths are. So I agree with you. Yeah, I think it's not just one size fits all. You have to be able to adjust.
Yeah, last thing that I wanted to talk with you about, and let's say that you're coaching a game, we're coaching a game. How much do you want to have in the back of your mind about a scouting situation based on how you coach a game? Let's say you're up 30 in the third quarter. How does that change how you coach a game? Do you just coach the game, or do you say, I don't want to put my sets on film, or we're just going to run our base offense for the rest of the game, or we're going to do things a little bit differently to throw them off our scent? Do you think about anything like that while you're coaching, or do you just coach?
There's probably been times where if we have a large lead, like maybe we don't go into our counter or our backdoor play that we're saving. But for the most part, I've always been one of like, if we're up 20, it's just about playing to our standard and setting those short-term goals like you had on there. Like, hey, if our goal on the scout was under 12 turnovers, like that's what we're talking about in the huddle. Like, I don't care that we're up 20. Like, our goal was to have under 12 turnovers. Hey, guys, we're at 9. We got to make sure we really take care of the ball and run some good offense here. Or, I always tell people to set short-term goals in games. Yeah. Whether you're down 20, you're up 20, set short-term goals. Like, look up and say, okay, guys, we're up 60-40. We want to keep them under 50 points. It's the fourth quarter. Yes, we're up 20, but we want to keep them under 50 points. And it gives those short-term goals to focus on. But yeah, I've never been one necessarily to like, let's hold back or not show this. I think it's just important to be like, this is who we are. We need to work on it. Because sometimes you need those live reps. You do need to work on it, or you do need to see if this play works. And everything you throw on film, well, guess what? The other team, if they're scouting, now they have to work on it. Yeah. Sometimes I may have even gone the opposite way and been like, hey, we're up 20. Hey guys, I know we'd never run a 2-3 zone, but just for these next 3 possessions, we're going to run 2-3 zones. So that next opponent thinks we run 2-3 zone, and now they have to at least work on it a little bit. I'm sure I've done that before, but yeah, I think it's probably more important just to focus on yourself and not worry about that.
Yeah, I do think that there's merit in thinking about like some of your specials. If you have a pet backdoor play or you have a pet baseline out of bounds play that you really only want to use in key moments of key games, that you keep that in your pocket and you don't put it on film. You limit the exposure of a concept like that. But I think there's also merit towards thinking about, what do we kind of need massaged out within our program? Maybe we put in like a new changeup defense, or maybe we're trying a new ball screen coverage or something like that. That might be a time to get live game reps where you're
Yeah.
just seeing how your team is executing that, where they're at, and then you can kind of dive in more, or maybe even scrap it if you get game reps that you're not pleased with. So I think you want to be conscious of those situations, and that's part of the fun part about coaching. And the tricky part about coaching is that, again, there's just not these one size fits all solutions where it's like, okay, we're up 20 in the third quarter, we're just going to do this. It's like, no, we've got to consider all of these different variables. Do we want to, we don't want to show some of our plays because we may be getting scouted, but we also have schemes we want to work on, but we also don't want the game to get crazy and let them come back. So, that is the fun part about coaching, is that it's just so hard to manage in a one size fits all situation. You really have to take into account all the different things that are going on, and that's what makes coaching fun. Hey, I really enjoyed talking scouting with you. We've done a couple of these.
It's been good.
A few of these.
Yeah, this is, I think, our third. This, I think, is our third time together. I think.
Okay.
I think this is. I think we did drills. I think we did. What was the other one? We did scouting today. We did something else. So this is our third time.
I've been trying to forget. I've been trying to forget the drills one because you embarrassed me because your drills were so much better than mine.
No, that's not true.
Like
that's not true. Well, no, we love being on here. And again, as I always say, we're trying to provide value. We want to help coaches. We're similar in that regard. And, I love these topics. I'd love to hear from you guys, in the comments, or you guys can always reach out to me of like any topics you guys want to hear about. Is there something that would help your program? And I've learned a lot, posting on YouTube and with some of my things, like my newsletter is just like, hearing feedback is always good for us, because then we can tailor it to, what coaches want to hear and what's going to provide value. So no, I always love it. I've really enjoyed it. Want to keep doing it. So yeah, if you ever want to have me on, would love to keep coming back.
Hey, I've got a lot of people that can come on and talk X's and O's with me. I've particularly enjoyed our sessions that we've done together. I think we're like-minded and we've had a lot of similar experiences in coaching. But what I appreciate about you the most is that you have this program building mindset, which is the same thing that I have, which is, we want to do right by our community. We want to build things up to be the best that it can. We're not scared to do the dirty work. We're not scared to do hard things to try to take our program to the maximum level that we can. And, I love these conversations that aren't about zone offense, but they're about how you build a program. And I think that you're a great guest to talk about any of those. So, Coach, we're going to sign off here. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to connecting up with you again, hopefully in the near future, to do another topic like this.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Coach. Have a good one.
Have a great night.